I'm Christie Rushenberg with Leaf Along, and this is Faith and Fiction Friday. For the last couple of weeks, we've been unpacking the initial steps in my novel Path to Prayer, which is a method of prayer that applies the principles of Lectio Divina to the stories that you encounter in your daily life, and in doing so, you encounter God. So today, now that you've picked a story and you've read it, the next step is to apply the faith to that story. Now, in order to talk about this step, I need to backtrack just a little bit and talk about a little bit more academic stuff for English classes and students, and I promise it pays off later. So if you're not really an academic person, don't worry, I'm going to break it down for you. Anyone who's ever taken an upper level English course in high school or college knows that from time to time, when analyzing literature, you'll apply what are called literary or critical theory lenses. These types of lenses allow you to analyze a text from different perspectives, depending on what is in focus. A lot of the times, it's like wearing regular glasses. Depending on the lenses, it can totally shape what it is that you see. These are my prescription lenses, so when I wear them, things that are a little bit farther away become more in focus because I have myopia. I'm nearsighted. So when I wear my glasses, everything that's 3 feet and beyond away all of a sudden become more in focus for me. But when I'm not wearing my glasses, everything from those distances become a little bit blurry. The same thing too when I wear my sunglasses, my prescription sunglasses, because now everything is not only in focus, but it's a couple of shades darker. So because of the lenses, how I see the world in front of me totally shifts, totally is different. And that's the same too when you apply a literary or a critical lens to the literature that you're reading. Sometimes I'll have my students apply a historical lens, and they're looking at that story in its place in history, what was historically significant at the time, is the novel commenting on something that's occurring in those moments in history, and they'll do a historical analysis. Other times, students will apply more of a cultural analysis. They're looking at what cultures are represented in the stories that we read and how they're being represented. Are they adhering to stereotypes? Are they breaking stereotypes? Are there certain cultures that are considered more or less valuable or more or less in power depending on the perspective of the other characters and the action of the plot? Sometimes I'll have them apply a gender analysis and look at how are men and women being constructed, what traits are considered positive, what traits are considered negative, what are the themes that are built around these understandings, what is the commentary. So there's lots of different lenses that you can apply, and many more besides these. But for our purposes, we're applying a lens of faith. So we are reading these stories thinking of our faith in mind, because when we do that, certain pieces are going to jump off the page in ways that they might not in other circumstances. What's interesting about this concept of literary lens is nothing new. In fact, there's a book that I'm going to reference. It's called How to Read Like a Professor. This is actually a book that our students read in the upper level classes in the high school where I work. And ironically, a lot of college professors, not a huge fan of this book. Part of the reason why is they think that the author, Thomas Foster, actually reduces literary analysis to more simplified understandings than the broader scope of literature. But for somebody who has no idea how to understand or analyze literature, this can be a really great starting point. So what's interesting is he talks about common symbols and common understandings and common cues that writers will put into the texts as coded language to create meaning and understanding for readers. And what's super interesting is despite the fact that this is a secular book, a lot of the chapters have to do with religion. So what's interesting about all of this is it takes huge moments from our faith and applies them to different aspects of literature, such as simple concepts like baptism and communion. Water is highly significant in most of the stories that we read, but most of the time we think of it as an allusion or as a symbol or a metaphor of cleansing, which it often is. I actually had a live video the other day talking about how snow can be cleansing and how there's seasonal significance in stories. But what's interesting about the faith is if there's a situation where a character encounters water, they're submerged in water, and then they come up from that submersion, it's usually a reference to baptism. Additionally, if there's a scene where the characters eat together, sometimes there's something happening with communion. It's not just about sitting down and eating because they're hungry. There's some sort of ritual that's happening there that's in reference to communion. So if you read the story and you keep in mind some of the tenets of the faith, you'll start to recognize these ideas. One of the other more popular ones is the Way of the Cross, the Via Dolorosa. Characters usually have to suffer, and sometimes they're suffering in sacrifice for something greater than themselves, some greater passion. And that can be a reflection of the crucifixion and even resurrection of Jesus. How many times have we read stories where characters are resurrected from the dead or come back to life? We've seen it in The Lord of the Rings with Gandalf. We've seen it in Harry Potter with Harry Potter. We've seen it in the Chronicles of Narnia with Aslan. Several times there are characters who come back to life. Sometimes it's a little bit more significant than others, but usually that's some kind of nod to resurrection. So there's a lot of different ways that you can apply the faith to that story. It's just being mindful of the eyes that you're looking through, or, the lenses that you're looking through. So my challenge for you is with whatever story you're encountering right now, whether it's something on Netflix or Hulu or a song that you're listening to on Spotify, wherever you're finding story, even if it's the story of your own daily life, see if there's some sort of parallel or connection to the actual faith. Does this story remind you of a story from Scripture? There might be something happening there. God might be wanting to talk to you there. Is this story, does it contain symbols or other elements, sacramentals as it were? Are there candles or salt or holy water? There's probably a connection there. So the next time that you're encountering story, or with whatever story you're encountering right now, see if you can make those connections, be mindful of those connections, because that's when things really start to get interesting, and that's when the prayer truly starts to begin with reading that story. Because like I said, to encounter story is to encounter God. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's Faith and Fiction Friday. Next week, we'll unpack the next step. Stay tuned.